In the backwoods of Bon Aqua, Tennessee, hidden behind a curtain of tall trees and tangled underbrush, sits a weather-beaten structure that was once all but forgotten. Not a studio, not a stage, not even a home, just a modest cabin. No signs, no security, no spotlight. A place no tour bus ever visited. A place never mentioned in Johnny Cash's autobiography. And for good reason. This wasn't a place designed for fans. It wasn't part of the legend. It was part of something else, something Cash never wanted the public to see. For years, even Cash's closest associates only referred to it in passing as the retreat. Some said he wrote songs there. Others claimed he went to pray. But the cabin was never listed in the estate's official assets. No photographs, no interviews filmed on site. Until now. In early 2024, a restoration crew hired by a private trust affiliated with the Cash family was sent to inspect the old property for structural damage. The cabin had been untouched since 2006, slowly decaying beneath vines and rain-rotted shingles. But under the floorboards, beneath a heavy rug, a cracked Bible, and a loose panel of warped wood, they found something that wasn't supposed to be there. A trap door, steel-reinforced, bolted shut. The key was nowhere to be found. At first, the crew assumed it was a root cellar, an old tornado shelter, maybe. But the bolts were custom, the hinges industrial. This wasn't built for weather. It was built to keep something out, or keep something in. They reported the discovery to the estate's legal team. Days later, permission was granted to open it. What they found underneath that trapdoor would set off a storm of speculation, theories, and silence. Because beneath Johnny Cash's forgotten cabin was a room no one was ever supposed to find. To understand why a hidden room beneath a forgotten cabin matters, you have to understand the man who built it. Not the legend, not the myth, the man. Johnny Cash was known to the world as a rebel, a voice for the broken, the man in black who sang for the sinner and the saint alike. He played prisons. He walked the line. He stood beside presidents, and then turned around and gave his heart to inmates. But behind all of that, there was another side, a private, haunted side few people ever saw. Friends said Johnny never fully came back from his darkest days in the late 60s and early 70s. Though he eventually cleaned up, there were moments that even June Carter didn't speak about, when Johnny would disappear for days, and not to party, to be alone in that cabin. That cabin, according to one former bandmate, was his ghost room. Not a vacation home, not a writing den, a place where Johnny went to confront something inside him. In court filings from a 1983 publishing dispute, there's a single obscure line in Johnny's own handwriting. Some lyrics can't be published. They belong to the cabin. What lyrics? No one knows. But it shows that the cabin wasn't just a space, it was sacred and secret. June Carter's cousin once told a Nashville radio station that Johnny referred to the cabin as the Black Church. When asked why, she claimed he said, "Because it's where I go to meet the things God won't talk to me about." He didn't just retreat from the world. He was searching. Some say for redemption. Others say for something he couldn't name. But the deeper you go into Johnny Cash's life, the more you realize he wasn't just carrying guilt, he was carrying a message. One he may have locked away beneath that cabin floor. And whatever it was, he didn't want it found until he was long gone. Until now. When the restoration team finally unbolted the steel trapdoor beneath the cabin floor, they expected dust, debris, maybe old storage. What they found instead was something far stranger. The stairwell descending beneath the floorboards was narrow, wooden and steep, built with care, but clearly designed for solitude. As the team stepped down, the temperature dropped. There were no windows, just a low ceiling, wood-paneled walls, and one dim, red-tinted light bulb dangling from the center of the ceiling. This wasn't a root cellar. It wasn't a shelter. It was a room built to stay hidden. Along the left wall were shelves, makeshift, uneven, lined with spiral-bound journals, cassette tapes, and leather-bound Bibles, each one filled with handwritten notes, some dated, some stained with age, many bearing the initials J.R.C., John R. Cash. A desk sat in the corner, dusty but intact. On top, an old reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind used in studios during the 60s and 70s. It was still plugged in, still functional. Next to it, a box of unlabeled reels, some marked only with single words like Dream, Mexico, Silence, and 1971. And then there was the trunk, heavy, metal, locked with a rusted clasp, and engraved with two simple letters, J.C. The team paused, took photos, contacted legal reps for the Cash estate before touching it. When they finally opened it, what they discovered inside wasn't treasure. It wasn't memorabilia. It was a sealed envelope, several loose photographs, and a single black composition notebook with the title, hand-scratched across the front in red marker, "Forgive me." Whatever had happened in that room, whatever Johnny Cash had buried beneath his own feet, wasn't meant for record labels or fans. It was meant to stay in the dark. But now, the light had found it. And the story was only beginning. Among the items recovered from Johnny Cash's hidden basement room, it was the cassette tapes that drew the most attention. Dozens of them, neatly stacked, many unlabeled. But a few bore names that seemed too personal, too raw to ignore. Sunday Confessions, The Desert, Help, and simply, Don't Let Them Hear This. The restoration crew, under legal supervision, played the first tape. The voice was unmistakable, low, weathered, steady. Johnny Cash. But this wasn't the voice of a performer. This was a man speaking alone in the dark, as if he were trying to leave behind something no one else would understand. On the first confession tape, Cash's words were slow, deliberate. "I've seen the devil. And I don't mean metaphorically. I don't mean sin or shame. I mean I saw him with my own two eyes." He goes on to describe a trip he took in 1971 to Mexico, one that isn't documented in any official tour history. He speaks of a desert encounter with a black-eyed man who knew my name before I opened my mouth. He says the man gave him a choice: run from the fame, or build something to contain what was following him. That something was the cabin. Other tapes veer into darker territory. Johnny discusses waking up in the middle of the night to unexplained symbols carved into the walls. He describes hearing voices while reading scripture. He confesses to walking through the cabin with a Bible in one hand and a loaded gun in the other. "They think I'm clean," he says in one recording, "but the things I saw don't wash off. I didn't get saved, I just got quiet." This wasn't the voice of addiction or relapse. These recordings were made well into his sober years, and he wasn't asking for sympathy. He was leaving behind a warning that some things never leave you, not with time, not with prayer, and not even with music. As investigators cataloged each reel, it became clear. Johnny Cash didn't just build a hidden room. He built a confessional tomb, and he left the door unlocked for us to listen. Folded between the pages of the composition notebook labeled "Forgive Me," sealed in a yellowed envelope addressed simply to June, was a handwritten letter Johnny Cash never mailed. The date at the top read March 3, 1973, a time when Johnny and June's marriage was strong in the public eye. But beneath the surface, Johnny was unraveling in private. The letter was never meant for public eyes. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't poetic. It was a confession and a warning. "June," he wrote, "there's a man I saw again last night. I don't know his name, but I saw him first in the desert, and he's come back. He watches from the tree line now. Not a man, not a ghost, something else." Johnny described in chilling detail recurring visions of a black-eyed figure appearing at the edge of the woods near the cabin, always still, always silent. He said it started after a tour stop in Mexico, where a stranger handed him a small pouch of herbs and whispered, "Don't open this in the city. Go somewhere the earth still listens." Johnny admitted he kept the pouch, but never opened it. What followed were weeks of restless nights, strange symbols appearing in ash around the cabin stove, and voices he claimed were not his own whispering through the floorboards. The letter continued, "I've prayed, June. I've begged. But I think something followed me back, and I built that room to trap it. I don't want to leave it for you or the kids. I go there to bleed it out of me." He signed the letter not as Johnny, but as J.R., his birth name John R. Cash. It was a man stripped down to the roots of his fear. There's no evidence June ever read the letter. It was sealed, untouched, possibly hidden before he could decide whether to send it. But its presence in the locked trunk suggests one thing. He wanted someone to find it one day. Not for sympathy, not for absolution, but so someone, anyone, would know the truth behind the man in black. Not just what he carried on stage, but what he carried into the dark. In one of the spiral-bound journals pulled from Johnny Cash's hidden basement, scribbled in red ink across the inside cover, were 3 haunting words: the Church of Cash. At first glance, it sounded like a nickname, maybe a joke, a metaphor for his fan base or his deep spiritual ties, but the entries inside told a different story. Johnny had used that phrase to describe a personal spiritual practice he never shared with the world. Not part of organized religion, not part of the church he and June attended on Sundays. This was something entirely his own, an improvised blend of Christianity, Cherokee ritualism, desert folklore, and mysticism. He wrote about creating sacred spaces in silence, about fasting in the cabin until his lips bled, about burning objects wrapped in cloth to keep the whispers out. One entry from 1974 read, "The man in black isn't me. It's something older wearing me like a coat. The church is my only defense." Across the pages were crudely drawn diagrams, ritual circles, symbols resembling ancient tribal glyphs, and prayers written in reverse. Some pages ended with chilling phrases like, "Don't let the music distract you. If I'm singing, it means I'm scared." Johnny also referenced a small group of trusted friends, never named, who occasionally joined him for ceremonies in the cabin. These were not parties. According to one note, "We didn't bring whiskey. We brought wounds." Could these ceremonies have been therapeutic rituals, spiritual experiments, or something darker? He never elaborated in full, but his fear was clear. The Church of Cash wasn't about worship. It was about survival. A way to battle whatever he believed had followed him from the desert into his music, and into his mind. He wasn't trying to convert anyone. He was just trying to contain something. And all of it, the journals, the drawings, the isolation, suggests Johnny Cash wasn't just a man of faith. He was a man building his own church to keep something unholy out. Just when the discoveries in Johnny Cash's hidden room couldn't get any stranger, an anonymous tip led investigators and Cash estate researchers to file a Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) request. The target? Government surveillance records that might have mentioned Cash during the height of his fame in the 1970s. What came back was redacted, heavily, but not empty. Contained within the pages was undeniable proof. Johnny Cash had an open FBI file. At first, it looked routine. Notes on his visits to prisons, associations with protest musicians, and his influence over anti-establishment audiences. But buried deeper was something odd. A 1971 report flagged Cash's coded speech patterns during a live radio sermon and questioned whether he was communicating with someone through his music. One memo read, "Subject's lyrics are inconsistent with commercial output. There may be embedded patterns or phrases intended for undisclosed listeners." Another chilling detail appeared in a report labeled Cash/Nevada/Unknown Desert Meet. Unscheduled stop observed near tribal reservation. No known recording sessions. Remained on site for 18 hours. Subject refused to disclose purpose. Who was watching him? Why did they care? More importantly, what was Johnny doing during those desert trips? The files also referenced untraceable cassette mailings sent from a post office in Bon Aqua, likely from the same cabin where the secret room was found. These tapes, the report claimed, had theological and possible psychological intent and were not commercially distributed. If the tapes had survived, they were never publicly acknowledged. Until now. In one government note, scribbled in the margin by a nameless analyst, was a final quote, "Cash may not be crazy. He may be carrying something no one wants to touch." It wasn't proof of a crime. It wasn't enough to take him down. But it was confirmation. Johnny Cash was being watched. And whatever he believed he was recording in that cabin, someone in power wanted to hear it first. Despite the mountain of discoveries beneath Johnny Cash's hidden cabin, one thing was disturbingly clear. Parts of the story were missing. Literally. Several of the spiral-bound journals had entire sections ripped out. The pages weren't worn, they were violently removed. Some were torn clean down the binding, as if someone panicked and didn't have time to be neat. Dates would jump erratically, May 3, 1974, followed by May 19th. Entire weeks were simply gone. Even more chilling were the gaps in the cassette tapes. One reel labeled Whispers Midnight, cut out 20 minutes in, then resumed with Johnny breathing heavily, whispering, "I don't know if I should keep recording this. I think someone's already heard it." That same reel ends with a single sentence. "If they find this, they'll burn the cabin." And maybe they tried. In 2007, 4 years after Johnny's death, a small fire broke out on the cabin property. It made no national news. There were no official photos. Local firefighters chalked it up to lightning damage and rotting electrical wiring. But now, with all the context we have, the timing feels too precise. The fire scorched the outer porch and blackened the edges of the main support wall, just feet from where the trap door was located. Coincidence? Or a quiet attempt to destroy what was below? Family members have remained silent. No public comments, no interviews. But one anonymous source close to the restoration team told reporters, "Someone had gone through that room before us. Some of those tapes weren't dusty. Someone had already been listening." Which begs the question, who knew? And what were they trying to erase? If Johnny was leaving behind a warning, someone may have tried to silence it before the world could ever hear it. But now, the door had been opened. The ashes had been swept away. And what remained was a puzzle missing just enough pieces to haunt whoever dared to solve it. The hidden room beneath Johnny Cash's old cabin is now sealed off, its contents relocated to a secure vault in Nashville. The Cash estate has offered no comment, no press release, no denial, just silence. And maybe that silence is the answer. Because what was found wasn't a crime scene. It wasn't a museum. It was a confession box built for one. A place where Johnny Cash poured out the part of himself the world was never supposed to hear. The man in black had always carried contradictions: gospel and rebellion, addiction and recovery, fame and faith. But the basement tapes, the torn-out pages, the letter to June, they paint a picture not of a legend, but of a man at war with something deeper than fame. Was it madness? Spiritual torment? Was it guilt? Or something darker he truly believed had followed him since that trip to the desert? We may never know, but what's undeniable is this: Johnny Cash left a trail. And while some of it was erased, destroyed, or burned, enough of it survived to change how we remember him. The final tape recovered ended not with a song or a prayer, but a whisper, a breathless, almost childlike voice saying, "If you hear this, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to stay buried, but I had to put it somewhere." And now, decades later, that somewhere has been found. Not in a record label vault, not on stage at Folsom Prison, but beneath an old cabin in the Tennessee woods, where the most haunted voice in country music spoke to no one, but still hoped someone would listen. Because maybe Johnny Cash knew what we didn't. The real message wasn't in the music. It was in what he was too afraid to sing out loud. And now, we're finally hearing it. Long before a single tape was uncovered, before the trap door was unsealed or the journals were found, Johnny Cash had already begun weaving the truth into the one place no one thought to search closely enough: his music. Not the radio hits, not the arena anthems, but the deep cuts, the overlooked verses, the quiet tracks buried at the end of forgotten albums. Take the 1974 song Jacob Green, a prison ballad about injustice, but listen closer, and there's an eerie stanza about a man who spoke to walls and named the fire. Or 1980's Field of Diamonds, which describes standing in a valley where the sky don't end and the sun don't rise. Lines that never charted, never sparked headlines, but now, after everything discovered in that hidden room, feel like breadcrumbs. One journal entry, dated 1987, confirms it. "They won't let me tell it all, but I can hide it in the songs. That's the only way they'll ever hear." Was this poetic frustration or deliberate encoding? A linguist hired to review Cash's lyrics post-discovery found recurring patterns, phrases like "shadow behind," "open the circle," and "he walks where no sound lives." All appear across different albums, years apart. Even more shocking, on one unreleased tape, Johnny quietly plays a haunting melody on guitar, then speaks directly into the mic. "You're gonna hear this long after I'm gone. Maybe by then, the world will be ready." What was he preparing us for? Some now believe that Cash saw music as a Trojan horse, a way to smuggle warnings, fears, and spiritual truths past the industry gatekeepers. Not to preach, but to whisper, to confess without anyone realizing that's what he was doing. And now that the cabin's contents have come to light, fans, researchers, Even Cash's former collaborators are going back through the discography, listening again, listening differently. Because maybe Johnny Cash wasn't just a man in black. Maybe he was a man trying to tell the truth, in the only language the world would accept: music. But now that we know what he left behind, we finally understand what he was really trying to say.